So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the CPAC's quarterly webinar. And we have a great lineup today. If you weren't familiar with an awesome conference that took place this past spring, talking about climate and what that means for the city of Columbia, for the Midlands area, then you missed a treat. But don't worry, because we're going to actually recap that conference today. And so we're actually going to be continuing that climate ready conversation where we had a lot of experts and a lot of individuals that are concerned about climate protection as it relates to the city of Columbia in the Midlands area, having that conversation in April. And so we're going to brief. What we have done is we brought together some of those experts as well as others to kind of continue on that conversation and have some different perspectives. And so, as a short introduction, my name is Dr. Tamara Warren. I am a CPAC appointee, as well as a member of the University of South Carolina. And so I'd like to introduce you to the panelists that we're going to be talking to today. First, we have Clint Sheely, who is the Assistant City Manager for the City of Columbia. So welcome, Clint. We also have Stacy Washington, who is a senior energy specialist with the South Carolina Energy Office of Regulatory Staff. Hi, Stacy. And we also have Dr. Matt Kisner, who is actually a director for Climate Ready Columbia, as well as a professor at the University of South Carolina. So nice to have you here, Matt. And again, I am Dr. Tamara Warren, and I'm going to serve as the moderator for today's conversation. And so, as mentioned, this past spring in April, we had the Climate Ready Columbia Conference. And it was an opportunity to get subject matter experts and other individuals together to talk about the importance of addressing climate change as it relates to the city of Columbia, really the whole region. And so there were multiple different sessions that took place. And so what we're going to do is Matt is going to share with us the vision behind the conference, why it was something that was important for the city to actually get behind, the city and the university to get behind. And if you weren't there, to give you an update of what that conference was about. So Matt, please share about the conference.
Great. Does that work?
It does.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks so much. And thanks for giving me this chance to talk about the conference. So the first thing off the bat, I want to recognize that the conference was made possible by a grant from the Ann Johnston Institute for Science, Technology, and Society at the University of South Carolina. And that grant actually funded a lot of activities, not just the conference. So I developed a course at the university about climate justice in Columbia, in which the students were required to do field research. They were required to get outside of the university, find out what's happening in the city, find out what's happening in the Midlands in terms of how we're responding and preparing for climate change. And the research that those students did became a lot of the basis for the conference. So I'm very grateful to my students. We also had a speakers series. There was a very successful sustainable yard tour done by us in concert with Sustainable Midlands. And then of course there was the conference. And the conference was put on by a lot of organizations. It was a true team effort. So I want to just acknowledge and recognize all of the different partner organizations that contributed to the conference. Thank you very much. So the main goal is just to facilitate municipal planning for responding to the climate crisis in the Columbia metropolitan area. So often when we think about climate change, you think about global, like the UN, or you think about national and what the federal government's doing, but climate change is going to affect every aspect of human life, and cities are on the front lines of this, and counties and smaller communities too. So the question is, what should we be doing here in Columbia to get ready? So underneath that goal, there's a couple other goals, sort of sub-goals. So one big one is knowledge sharing. There are so many different pieces to responding to climate change. So you have somebody working over here and then somebody working over here, and oftentimes they can get siloed. So people don't know what all of the different actors are doing. So one big goal was just to share knowledge about what is happening now. What are all of the different people who are working and what are they getting done? Most importantly, probably though, we want to highlight municipal level policy options. What is it exactly that we can be doing here in the city, in the county, in the university, with local businesses at that very local level? What can we be doing to prepare? We also want to share scientific research about policies, about climate science. And then we also wanted to share experiences that other municipalities have had. What are they doing in Asheville? What are they doing in Portland? What experiences are they having? What works, what doesn't work? A second goal is connection building. So if we're going to be responding effectively to climate change, we need lots of different parties working together in a coordinated way. And so the conference worked to bring together all of these different groups. So we had Mayor Rickenman kicked us off. So that's city elected officials. We had city staff. We had excellent representatives from city staff. Thank you very much. We had county representation. The energy office was there, state agency staff, the business community, lots of advocacy groups, nonprofits, other municipalities. We had people here from Greenville. We had people from Charleston, university, students, faculty, and staff. And then this national nonprofit that our keynote speaker was from, the Emerald Cities Collaborative. And she actually had a ton of really important information for us. And sort of the last goal of the conference was public engagement. So all of this information we wanted to share not just with the experts, but share it with the public. And we wanted to provide meaningful points of entry for public involvement in planning our climate response. So that's the quick and dirty overview of what we did with the conference.
All right, thank you, Matt. And so again, for those of you who were not in attendance, and even for those who had the opportunity to come, it actually was a 2-day conference. And so the way we're going to do the webinar today is we're going to kind of recap those highlights and just have general conversation about the topics that were covered in the different sessions and what that means as we relate to our different areas of expertise. And so you have an opportunity to actually see some of the footage from the videos. We'll have a few clips kind of going over the topics that were covered, and then we will give our perspectives. And so one of the first clips we're going to take a look at is the keynote address by Dr. Denise Fairchild. And she is the head, or was the head of Emerald Cities Collaborative. And so in the clip that we're going to take a look at now, she's talking about how we're actually existing in various areas as it relates to climate change or the impacts with climate change and what that means for the community.
I think it's really the smaller rural communities that should be leading the way in this. I think the lifestyle of smaller rural communities, and we were talking about it earlier today, even Black and brown communities, we've been living as environmentalists, and we don't even call ourselves environmentalists in terms of how we reuse things and our your own just closeness to land. You know, these land economies are really the drivers, I think, for a new way of thinking about how we live our lives. And I'd like to hear your perceptions about this. And I would say, I mean, I'm an urban jungle girl, born and raised in New York City. I'd probably break out in hives if I had to live in a rural community. But the bottom line is, you know, my parents came from Charleston. My father did, and my mother's from North Carolina. The only reason we're out of the South is because y'all chased us out. Y'all either lynched us or, you know, just made just life so miserable. We had to get the hell on out. Okay. So, but you know, folks coming back. We, you know, sister here from Detroit, she came on down. She's coming back home. So anyway, there's something about rural life that just means that we need to capture. And every new transition, if you're a cultural anthropologist, there's studies that show every time we've changed sources of energy, we've also changed our culture. We changed the institutions, how we educate people, our finance systems. All of that's changed, you know, when we're agricultural, industrial. Well, what is the cultural shift we're making with this? There's nothing intentional yet being said about if we're going into renewable energies, what is it about our sensibilities, about living more in balance with the ecosystem that should be changing our culture? So anyway, I just think that this is the time to do this. I believe leave you with this, is that I don't think it's that crazy to really figure out how we live large on less, because I think it's happening already. I think the cultural shift is happening, and my job is to figure out how to accelerate it and how to amplify on it. And it's happening because of COVID and what it's brought to families, but it's also the great resignation, right? Was it 4 million jobs every month? It's just like I'm out. I'm just done. Okay, I'm just not living this way anymore. 12-hour days and weekends, and I need life work balance, or I'm just out of the city. I'm going to rural community. People out. They're calling it quits. Love to figure that out. Young people are out, they are done with the myth of the American dream, right? And $200,000, college bills, can't buy a house, can't still live with mom, can't get a good paying job, can't, don't want a car. So what, when you think about culture, young people are the carriers of culture, young people and women. So how do we capitalize on how young people are thinking, their notion of a shared economy? There is a movement to dematerialize our economy. There is the whole new economy movement, as well as the new energy movement. The only thing I want to leave you with is just a couple of things. One is that
Okay. And so in this particular clip, there are at least two major areas that Dr. Fairchild covered. One was the idea that the biggest energy use we see is that which is discretionary, but then she also talks about this big cultural shift and even the idea of living larger or bigger on less. And I think that actually resonates as we are coming on the other side of the pandemic. We have been in a state, not the state of South Carolina, but we've been in a state where we've had to kind of shut down and what that has meant for business and for our economy. And so I pose a question to the three of you. What do you think of those two major concepts that she's talked about? The cultural shift, what that means as it relates to addressing climate issues, and then the idea of, kind of connected is the idea of the discretionary energy that has been our biggest uses. And I open the floor to anyone who wants to start us off.
Well, I'll chime in about the whole discussion of the rural, and I think that's kind of the cultural, where she said the rural communities may be leading the way, because I think back to my family came from a rural area, and I think about my grandparents and how, back when my parents were growing up, you ate every part of the animal. There wasn't any waste. And now we're coming up into the times where everybody is just, like she mentioned, disposable and the new, you buy a shirt just for one event. And I think that's some of that shift that we need to think about. Now we're coming out of a pandemic. We're coming out of a time when we had a time to reevaluate. This is the time to think, what have I learned from that and how can I change? So this is a good time to make those changes. It could just be one little thing that you do that can be the start of something new. You can do meatless Mondays, or you could decide that I'm gonna buy a power strip and make sure I use that and cut off my plug loads. Whatever it is, that one little thing can make a difference, and this is the time to do it.
I could jump in here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really like this idea of getting comfortable with living with less and using this as an opportunity to rethink what we're doing. And I do think there's an appetite for people being inspired by the rural. So part of the affiliated events with the conference was the Sustainable Yard Tour, right? And so much of that is people growing their own food and bringing kind of more of those practices back into their lives. And I could tell from that there's definitely an appetite for it. So I hope she's right. I hope people are rethinking these kinds of things, because we definitely need to be rethinking them. The way that we are living is not sustainable in the long term. But I think I kind of want to push back a little bit about something she said, though. So often these conversations ask us to be reflective as individuals about how we need to be changing our lives to fix these problems. And I just want to I want to push back against that, right? There are large institutions and large corporations that are at the appropriate scale to be able to create the kinds of solutions that we need for the climate crisis. And we are not going to get ourselves out of this by people, people decide they want to ride bikes or plant some vegetables. That's not going to fix it. We need institutional level change. So cultural change is definitely part of the picture, but we shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking that that's the only solution, right? We can't do it without larger systematic change, which requires our governments and institutions and not just changing our individual practices.
Hey, Dr. Warren, I'll chime in a little bit there. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
Great. So yeah, really good. Dr. Fairchild hit some really good points there. And it's striking when she talks about living large on less. I think, we need to redefine what living large really means. And we've allowed larger corporations that are marketing to us to be consumers and consume more and more, and that driving our happiness. And, I talk with our employees quite often about being content, and having a sense of purpose. And that means a more meaningful life. And it's not about how much stuff we have. And I talk to my family a lot about that, and they talk to me a lot about that. And it's, just getting back to what does living large really mean? What is the good life? It doesn't mean we've got so much stuff and the disposable nature of consumerism. I don't know, y'all may have seen there's a popular blue jean manufacturer has a commercial out now that is encouraging you to buy their blue jeans because they last a whole lot longer. And truth be told, they probably do. You can wear a pair of that particular brand for years. And but that's kind of the model that they're pushing now to make folks buy their product because it'll last a lot longer and it's more sustainable and better for us. So the discretionary consumeristic attitude and thinking that will drive our happiness individually or as a culture is something that we obviously need to change. Those of us that grew up in rural areas, or it was a different day, at least my generation when we grew up, and so consumerism wasn't really an option, and so but we were very, very happy. Well, we were happy as kids and growing up. So I think changing that mindset. If you look at the demographics, people are gravitating more toward our cities, but maybe if we can bring some of that simpler, less consumer-driven lifestyle, that mentality of the rural area to living in an urban area, then it does change us. How do you get the corporations to stop wanting to sell all their stuff to make money? I don't know, Matt, that's a great question, but I mean, that is really, that's driving a lot of the propaganda to hey, this is how you can be happy, get more stuff. So, just a couple random thoughts there.
No, and I think all of those are great because to your last point, Clint, which was brought up by Matt, if we're talking about a cultural shift, yes, there's definitely the individual things that we can do as residents. But I think one of the bigger questions is how can that actually transfer over to our businesses or other institutions, especially again, as we're coming out of a pandemic and we want to make sure that we still have an economically viable area. And part of that is going to be through some level of consumption or consumerism. So how can we balance that? And I think there's no one easy answer for it, given all of the challenges that we have. But can we have a cultural shift that supports that while everyone is still getting some type of benefit? Okay. Any other thoughts on that? If not, we're going to move on to the next segment. Okay, so thank you. So the next clip we're going to look at is from a session that was looking at the actions that are taking place in other cities. And so we had Con Palm, who is an organizer of the campaign in Portland, Oregon, who passed a citizens initiative that established the Portland Clean Energy Fund. She is now a representative in the Oregon State Legislature, and specifically this fund provides grants to community-based organizations for green projects and especially to promote equity in the green transition. And so we'll see in this particular clip her explaining a little bit more about those initiatives.
So as Sam mentioned, PSEF passed overwhelmingly on a nearly 2-to-1 basis in 2018, and our Grassroots Coalition went up against some of the largest corporations in the world, and it was such a huge boost for our organizations. We had never launched a ballot measure campaign before. We had very little funding. It was really led by groups that used our existing organizers. We did have, I was on staff as the environmental justice manager at Apano, but I wanted to say, it wasn't, sometimes people feel like, oh, you have to be so powerful, or you all had your stuff together before you launched. But in truth, I would say we didn't know what we were doing, but we recognized that we had to do something given the immensity of the crises we face. And so this was a huge capacity building exercise for us. We knew we knew that we didn't know if we would win, but we knew that launching this would actually strengthen our capacity to know what it took to win a campaign at the ballot. And that was what our goal was as well, not just to win this fund, but also to build our muscles, our electoral muscles. So Sam talked a little bit about how how it works and what it funds, and the 9-member grant committee that really reflects the economic, racial, and social diversity of our city. And he talked a bit about some of the grants that we're funding. It includes weatherizing homes of low-income Portlanders and ductless heat pumps that are going to keep us cool during these heat waves. It includes job training for people who are formerly incarcerated. I mean, there's so many areas where we need to broaden the green economy to include all of Portland.
You're muted.
My apology. So in this clip, we see where grassroots efforts were taking place in another larger city, such as Columbia, where individuals on the ground decided that they wanted to take control or even be in the front line as far as making a difference within their community. And so in this case, she talked about, their ability to actually go to the ballot to make some changes. And what we saw, or what she shared, was the different projects that took place. And so the job training, the different funds that were available to implement things within the city. And so what do you think this looks like for the city of Columbia? Just as we've just had a conversation conversation about cultural shifts and who the onus really falls on. Is it the individual citizen? Is it the municipalities? Is there a shared experience? And so just from what took place within this clip, what are your thoughts?
I'll go again. I always say, you have the power, so if you have, and of course there's the quote, be the change. And if you see a problem, don't be afraid to step out there and make that change. And so many times, working in the energy office, we see all these opportunities and we say, well, where'd the money come from? So this is inspiring to see that somebody took that initiative to create this fund, because you need money to have these things happen. And I say, if it's the CPAC, or if it's a citizen, or if it's a member of the City of Columbia staff, whoever it is, step out there and help and be that change. And this is one of the results of that, is having a program for weatherization for energy efficiency projects. And we do, by the way, have an initiative going on at the Energy Office for a green bank. We're looking at the feasibility of one for the state. So hopefully we'll be able to do some things like this out of that. So stay tuned.
Yeah, awesome. Matt or Clint, any ideas or thoughts?
Should we keep going in the same order?
Whoever wants to step up, that's fine.
It's inspiring, isn't it? It makes me jealous of Portland. But I guess my response to that is, it would be awesome to live in Portland. And it would be awesome to be part of that community, and that's exciting. But at the same time, I don't feel like, because we don't live in Portland and we don't necessarily have that kind of community action, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing that we can do, right? And one of the things that I learned, I've learned just by watching kind of how things work over the last few years, is how much power individuals can have. Like, you don't have to have, if we can get a ballot initiative, awesome. But if you don't have a ballot initiative movement happening, like, individuals can still make a huge difference. And I've seen individuals who are on CPAC who just completely take the bull by the horns and become very active and get into the nuts and bolts of what can we be doing? What should we be doing? Making time every week to make progress on their projects, and a lot can happen from that. So I'm inspired by Portland, but I also don't want people to feel like you have to be like Portland. There's still a lot of good that we can do here as individuals in our own ways.
Yeah, totally agree with both Stacy and Matt. Great comments there. Columbia is different. We're different than Portland. We're different than Charleston. We're different than Greenville. And so we got to be true to who we are. And maybe we're not ready for ballot initiatives, but we can do great things. And I've seen CPAC do some incredible things in terms of planning and being strategic and smart about how do we craft a path and what does that look like. Really intrigued by their job training program. I think that's excellent. I think that speaks to, when you look at housing, and we've already started having conversations about, some of our equity in making renewable energy available to the entire community of Columbia, the entire community of Midlands. Those are important. Grant opportunities and having those things. I'm really excited to hear about the Green Bank. That's really cool, and there do seem to be more grant opportunities that are out there for us. I think being smart, strategic, and finding a solution that will work well, or building a movement that works well for Columbia is really, really important for us as we look to move forward. We don't have to be like somebody else. It can be unique to us, and our partnership with USC and the work that CPAC is doing is really got us moving well in that direction.
So one question I pose is that I think sometimes when we hear about grassroots efforts, there could be the perception that it's us against them. And so maybe it's the little guy against the municipality, it's the little guy against the big box store. And so what are your thoughts in the idea that grassroots doesn't necessarily mean there's a division, but it's an opportunity to really be collaborative on, measures that could benefit the entire community. And so maybe what are your thoughts on that we trying to kind of change the perception on what it means to be grassroots? Not that I guess the traditional definition isn't relevant, but what does it mean, especially when you're talking about, all of these different entities that are within the community. And so if the people decide they want to make these various changes or they want these things to come in, what does it mean to have those collaborations?
I'll start.
I'll start with that.
Go ahead, Clint.
Dr. Warren. Oh, I'm sorry, Stacy. I reversed the order on you here, but I think about it in terms of as a municipal government employee, we're so focused on the provision of base services and whatever council's priorities are. But to me, the grassroots is the voters, the citizens making these initiatives a priority to their elected officials and communicating with them, and then communicating with staff that, this really is a priority. We need to be spending time on this. Certainly not adversarial. It's a matter of discussing priorities, and folks speak at the ballot box, but that only happens every so often. There's an open channel and conduit and public meetings and communication opportunities with elected officials all the time. And so, that to me, that's where it happens. People speaking about what is important to them and letting elected officials know that, and letting us as staff know that. Certainly CPAC's a good model for that. So Matt spoke to it, the power of the individual. And then as we do have organizations like CPAC to be more collective in that voice, it can be very effective. So it makes me hopeful.
And I'll just piggyback on that from the state level. A lot of what we do is working with, we don't call it grassroots, but stakeholder engagement, bringing in all of the different parties to talk about a specific topic, and everyone voicing their opinion. And then we come out with recommendations that are a collaboration from everybody that was at the table. And that's really powerful because we can say, okay, everyone came together and we discussed this topic. Our last one was electric vehicles. And these are the recommendations that we put forward. And then people can take those and make things happen, whether it's the energy office or whether it's a legislative initiative that is needed, whether it's another group that needs to meet to make a plan. We've all come together and agreed that these are the actions we need to take to move forward. And that's more powerful than anything, I think, is that everybody came together and agreed on that.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, adversarial is not the right way to think about how to get change done. It's all about collaboration and working together. And it's amazing. There are people from like a totally different part of the political spectrum, and you just assume they're going to be totally different, but it's not, right? Like we're all human beings and we all have shared kind of values and concerns, and you'd be amazed at how much people are willing to work with you and find common ground with you, kind of no matter where their starting place is. So there's a lot of space for collaborative work.
Okay, awesome. Now we're going to take a look at a third clip, which is looking at the future of electric vehicles in the city of Columbia. So we had Ben Kessler, who is a public policy manager for the East Coast branch of ChargePoint, and they're responsible for installing and managing EV charging stations. And in this particular clip, he talks about the steps cities and other major institutions can take to support EVs.
How do we support electric vehicles here in South Carolina? We know that these vehicles are here in Columbia, they're operating, they're coming through our city to other cities. How do we make sure that we're benefiting from this as well? So public charging, like we talked about, can be used as an economic engine to get people into areas to revitalize, or shopping, retail areas, but also just to bolster the image of what Columbia is, right? We want to be a leader, a thought leader in this. We want to be sustainable. We have this goal to be climate ready. Electric vehicles are certainly an element of this because our emissions are now our highest emission sector is transportation. So this is a way to reduce that. Fleet, we talked about lead by example using EVs. The South Carolina Energy Office is a great example of that. Right, we want to pilot and then scale. So what that means, getting one vehicle in and then, seeing how it goes for a year, and then getting 5 if it goes well. Start small and then start growing up. We gotta crawl before we can run, and before that we gotta walk. So those are good things to keep in mind. I'll also say there are electric vehicles on state contract now. There is a Nissan Leaf that you can take advantage of that's really at a competitive price and really can be used in a multitude of different functions, from admin to police to public works, things like that. Again, like I said, utilize managed charging, especially if you're a bus or transit fleet. Plugging in at the wrong day, getting hit with peak pricing can really be bad. Another thing that's really important, I think, for the city as well as the university with housing is multifamily, right? We want to provide incentives, whether that's economic or financial or whatever it may be, to builders to include EV make ready within construction plans. We know that the cost of construction to put in a dryer plug, to plug in a charger is about $50 at the point of new construction. If you go back and retrofit a new building, it could be a couple $1,000s. So that is the point we want to make across, that it is so much of a lower hurdle to do it up front than to come back where there's all this resistance. Permitting and codes, making sure that the EV permit process, if a developer or a construction contractor wants to put in an EV charger, make sure that there's an easy to follow, easy to navigate process through the city to get that permit for construction approved, whether it's a breakaway function from all the other commercial building permits that you're doing. Just make it an easy process and streamlined. Again, building codes will help enable this, and then take advantage of grant opportunities. The State Energy Office really tries to pair and match make on grant opportunities. Work with them, work with private-public partnerships to enable the expansion of EV charging infrastructure.
So in this particular clip, there's a lot of options that have been presented. So there's opportunities for having infrastructure that supports electric vehicles and the charging stations, as well as the idea that these institutions, whether it's a university, whether it's the City of Columbia, can switch their fleet over to EVs, and then just the support of those private citizens who have EVs themselves. And so what are your thoughts as far as a municipality or an institution moving into these areas where they're really promoting these type of initiatives, where, we are a country that is big on, cars and vehicles that are typically tapped into fossil fuels, but now making this transition to the other options. And so what are your thoughts about just really encouraging the larger institutions to kind of make this shift or change?
I was trying not to go first. Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
All right, I'll take that, Stacey. We got to make Matt go first here one time. No, so just a couple things that this transition is happening. Everybody's filled up their SUV lately has felt the pain at the pump, right? And so I think it was happening even before the gasoline prices increased somewhat. We're starting to see a lot more interest. As a city, late this afternoon, I was reviewing some of our capital projects that are on the horizon. And one of those capital projects is kind of redoing our fleet services facility and retooling that so that we're in a position to work and train our workforce on electric vehicles rather than just, the internal combustion engines and diesels that we use now. So that's something that we want to do and kind of, again, retool that facility. There's also an item and some hopefully dollars associated with electric vehicle charging infrastructure for both city fleet, but also throughout the city. Those are things that are on our minds, and we're thinking about trying to facilitate that and accelerate that. We're going to have, as soon as we can get it off the assembly line, a new F-150 Lightning vehicle that we're going to try out in Public Works as a light duty pickup, and to kind of, that'll be our first, real EV that we've had. And then we're also putting together, I think based on a model from North Carolina, a request for proposals and looking for some grant funding to develop that vehicle electrification roadmap for our city fleet. And I think there's a model in Chapel Hill where that has been done, and we've kind of gotten a little bit of what they've done. And I know, Stacy, we've been working with some of your folks too and getting information about what does that look like, educating ourselves on where do we need to go, what are the steps that we need to take to be smart out and be ready for when this transition happens. So that's kind of the fleet discussion. Really interested in what the speaker was saying about the multifamily housing incentives and the cost to do it up front being so much more affordable than to retrofit. It's certainly something that we're very interested in as a city. And then grant opportunities. I participated this week on some interviews where we're seeking some consulting services to help us go after grants. And energy grants was a specific category that we were looking for assistance with. So the city's looking to move in that direction as well and try to capitalize on any opportunities that are out there. So.
Awesome. Additional thoughts matter, Stacey?
Okay, yeah, I'll just talk about from my perspective of how it's happening and what's happening from the top as far as federal government, and from the bottom from our EV electric vehicle stakeholder initiative we had this past year. Like Clint was speaking about, they're looking at doing a roadmap at the city. We're also looking at doing a state roadmap as one of the recommendations from electric vehicle stakeholder initiative. And also there's encouragement from the federal government in the way of grants for infrastructure for the Department of Transportation. So, what's comes first, the chicken or the egg? They're encouraging people to get vehicles, and then we also need that infrastructure for people to charge when they travel, when they're at destinations. If you go to shopping or you go on a trip, you need a place to charge, just like you need a place to fuel. So, a lot of activity and things are happening on the federal and state level. Our report for the electric vehicle stakeholder initiative will be out this summer, hopefully in July. So you'll be able to look at the recommendations there. And a lot of that is looking at infrastructure, multifamily, make ready. A lot of the utilities are planning for that, having incentives available for commercial and for residential to encourage charger implementation as well. So a lot of activity is coming, and look for it. And so they're really trying to encourage that all over.
So just to add real quick, firstly, I am just like over the moon about the transition to electric vehicles and how fast it's happening. I mean, at this point, it's happening like they can't produce electric vehicles to keep up with demand. It's happening that quickly. And so sometimes I get this kind of hopelessness that we're not changing as quickly as the scientists tell us we need to be changing. And then you start to see this like real radical shift. And that's very exciting and gives me great hope. But I was glad to hear both Stacey and Clint talk about the importance of residential charging, because I think that when we imagine changing our infrastructure, sometimes we think, oh, well, it'll be like the gas stations will just be charging stations. And so we'll just keep like gas stations, but have them do charging. But the way that this works is that most of the charging would happen at your house, because it's only, it's not like if you had a private gas station in your house, and unless you were going further than 200 miles away from your house, that's the only thing you would use. Like, that's the transition. So making sure that we're thinking about what this new infrastructure is going to look like, I think is really important, and the ways that it's going to be different than the infrastructure that we have now, which I think is just fascinating. It's like, as someone who's interested in like the futurism and like what the world will be like in the future, I think that's really just interesting to think about.
Okay, awesome. All right, so we're going to go to another clip. And this one is looking at climate change and the Gills Creek watershed. And so as some of you would know, this is an urban watershed that is located right here in the city of Columbia or the Midlands area. And so there were multiple individuals on the panel, but in this particular clip, we're going to hear from Bill Davis, who is the director of Richland County's utilities. And he's talking about designing for flooding risks in the county. And for many of you who are residents, you know, unfortunately, flooding is something that we deal with regularly and for multiple reasons. And so we're going to hear about some of his ideas behind that.
We need to design for the new normal. And I want to do a quick picture. This is actually Hurricane Joaquin coming over. And I didn't know if it was going to work or not, but the graphic actually is working. And that is Jessica in the top left corner. And she and I were working together for FEMA down on Timberlane when I was with CDM Smith in Tall Pines area. And that's me on the bottom with all the structures that went into the woods. And it was pretty crazy to see that kind of water. And it really is life-changing when you see all of that damage and all that destruction and you think, are we going to continue to rebuild? I think one of the biggest things we can do as municipal people, as activists, as people that are concerned citizens, we can think about what are the things that we can do to mitigate future damage. I think one of the biggest things that we can do is start to catalog all of our structures that are in these areas as far as municipalities like Richland County is concerned, City of Columbia. I think that we go in and we itemize all of our structures, all of our infrastructure. And there's several things you can do. You can say, what happens if I do nothing and it gets underwater? The new normal, not the old normal. What happens if it goes under 5 feet of water? How much of it's going to be burned up and not be able to be used again versus how much of it's going to be able to be utilized? So do we adapt it? Do we build it up? Do we waterproof it? Those are things that we need to think about. Or do we rebuild it in a situation like, I know Jessica was talking about structures that had been rebuilt higher. How do we make those structures resilient? There's other things that we can do, like we can reconsider the base flood. What is the base flood? What we assign that, so do we need to reconsider what does that storm need to look like? Do we need to consider rain events? Do we need to start considering it as in feet of water as opposed to storm events? I don't know the answer to that. Again, the difference of a few feet can exponentially reduce your loss. We need to work with the local authorities. Let's try to streamline the ability to get these easements. If you're a community person, work with your local municipal folks to try to get those gravity systems installed. They take more time. They're a little bit more of an investment at the front, but in the long run, those are going to be better. You're going to need to try to build get this adequate freeboard. One of the things that I really love is being able to keep those right-of-ways clear. We can start looking at greenways. We can double dip, so to speak, by putting our gravity sewer lines through an area that we're going to keep clear anyway. So now we're protecting our infrastructure and we're opening it up to viewing our beautiful environment that we live in. And South Carolina is so fortunate to have so many beautiful waterways. Regionalize these facilities. I think where I stand right now is regarding a bunch of little tiny pump stations and a bunch of little tiny infrastructure. I think we need to think of the larger infrastructure and the fact that we're reducing our carbon footprint by having one localized facility, one localized wastewater treatment facility, and we reduce the workforce that's required. Because right now I'm driving, my people are driving all over the county trying to get to all these little pump stations. Whereas if we could eliminate, we are doing that. Richland County is very forward thinking. We're eliminating some of our pump stations and putting gravity sewer lines in. It's an investment because these assets are already occupied. We're investing in the money with funding. We're trying to get things going so that we can eliminate as many pump stations as we can. Lastly, I did meet a really interesting gentleman that worked Hurricane Sandy. He was from Oklahoma. He was from FEMA when I was with CDM Smith. And I met him out in the field. We were right down off Bluff Road. And he always chewed a cigar. He was a big fellow and chewed a cigar. And he's out there talking, chewing a cigar. And he said something I'll never forget. He said, elevation is your salvation from inundation. And that's what I'll leave you with till we get back to the panel. Thanks again for having me.
So I think in this clip, it really talks about one of the major issues we see just in the conversation about climate change itself is the actual impacts that we see on communities. So the flooding that takes place, those low-lying areas, whether it's coastal cities or islands where they have to contend about those, the sea rising that's going to take place, and what that means for the infrastructure and for the people. And so obviously in this clip, you had Bill talk about different initiatives that can take place. And so one of the things that he really hones on is designing for the new normal. And so just your thoughts on what does that really mean? He gave some great initiatives that are currently in the works or things that they would like to do. But this whole notion of, designing for the new normal, maybe at a municipality or institution or a state level, we have an understanding of what that means. But how does that resonate for just a general resident or citizen? So just kind of what are your thoughts about this? Preparing really for the new normal, which really is already upon us. And Matt, maybe you can take the new order. I won't put the pressure on you.
Yeah, I mean, I love that clip. It was great. That guy's got a lot of character, and what he was saying sounds right to me. In terms of the details of, specifically, like, what does the new world order look like, and like which specific kinds, like, I think I would need somebody who's more of a policy expert than me on that. I would say though that something that really resonates with me that the speaker said was looking at the long-term cost. And I think municipalities are so often so cash strapped, and resources are so limited that there's this pressure to kind of just do what is cheapest in the short term. But we have to be, keeping in mind these, intense weather events that used to be really rare and are now really frequent, and kind of doing a cost benefit analysis that really takes that into account when we make these kinds of decisions.
So I'm curious if anybody was in 5 Points on Saturday around 3 or 3:30 this past week. That is a glaring example of high intensity rain events in an urban area and what can happen when you've got so much impervious surface out there. We had just quick numbers. The Rocky Branch went from about a flow rate of about 1 million gallons a day to about 2 billion gallons a day in 15 minutes. The flow was roughly equivalent for 15 minutes to what is released from the Lake Murray Dam into the lower Saluda River. That went through Rocky Branch because we had a thunder cell camp out, and of course there's flooding. And there's low-lying areas, there's flooding. And in order to combat that, you can build these huge concrete drainage ditches that are just massive, and you may never, that was a 50-year storm event that happened in terms of recurrence interval. And it just, that was the only place in the city it happened. I'm right there at one of the worst spots. But, we could have a huge concrete ditch running down Rocky Branch, and which is unsightly and not great for the environment and runs dry most of the time, but it's, has a little bit of water trickling through it. Or you can try to address it with things like MLK Park and what we want to do in Maxie Gregg Park, which is stream restoration, build a little bit of storage, and then through planning and different measures to encourage pervious pavement and less runoff. And you'll never be able to design for the 50-year storm event, but you can minimize the impact of a 50-year storm event by some of those softer measures that are far better for the environment, and I believe far better for us as citizens to enjoy walking by a natural stream that's been beautified, and the bank restored, rather than these, what you might see in Las Vegas, which are these, or somewhere out west, these large concrete ditches. So the recurrence interval, we described them as 50-year storm events, but it seems like the 50-year event or the 20-year event are happening a lot more frequently right now, and that's troubling. But so we've got to try to design infrastructure to address that. Bill mentioned, and he does have a lot of character, Matt, and he is a character. Bill's a personal friend of mine, so he's a good guy. But sharing greenways where you've got sewer or storm drainage easements, and we're trying to do that so that people can enjoy a healthy lifestyle and get out and enjoy the environment, and while we're keeping access to our infrastructure available. The scenario planning and thinking differently is something that is very always at the forefront of my mind. I started my career with the City of Columbia as the waterworks superintendent about 6 months before the flood of 2015. I was at the Canal Water Plant when that thing happened that most of us can't seem to forget, and have been involved in the negotiations to rebuild the canal. But it has been absolutely paramount for us as a city and as a utility to build that back a lot better than we were in October of 2015. It's been characterized as a 1,000-year flood, but that thing that happened can happen again. We've got to be prepared for that exact same occurrence that could happen anytime. And so, and being prepared doesn't mean having more Chinook helicopters to drop sandbags. It means having complete resiliency. And so we've found some FEMA grant money to build basically a redundant intake and take water directly from the river if needed to serve our customers, so that if something did happen to our canal system, we wouldn't have this emergency and folks out of water. But it never thought about, it had not thought like that as a utility or a municipality before that thing happened. But I can promise you, we think about it now, and we're planning differently.
I'll just chime in from the state level. So there is the South Carolina Office of Resilience that is working on a state resilience plan as we speak. So they are looking at flooding. That's their first thing, is to look at, what's flooding is happening and what can we do to be resilient and be prepared so that we're not in the situation we were in 2015. So that is the big focus of their work. And in on the citizen level, some of the citizens that I've spoken with, I speak with them on energy, but then they get into flooding, and they were mentioned that one of the things that they needed was that the ditches just needed to be cleaned out and cleared, and that system needed to be redone, because that was a problem for them. That situation was a hurricane came through, and they had flooding after that because the ditches were that had been dug hundreds of years ago, just hadn't been maintained. So that's one of the things that's a concern from citizens on the flooding front. And then just speaking with them on energy. So after the flood or after the hurricane, a lot of times they're the power's out. So we're looking at critical facilities, and in the energy office, we are looking at critical facilities and thinking, okay, in the energy world, what can we do to have things for them so that they can get the power back on and provide that water for those citizens during that time before they can get their own power on. And then looking at citizens with home health problems, and can we provide some devices for them to have somebody that might need an oxygen tank or that needs some type of other device to keep them alive. And then we have some citizens that just want to generate their own electricity because they might stay at home during a hurricane, and then after the hurricane, they're out of power. So what can we provide for those communities that have that desire and want to maybe can't afford solar or storage? What can we provide, and what kind of programs can we develop for those communities?
Okay, thank you. So we just have a few more clips that we're going to go over, but the next one is talking about biking and walking in the communities. And so we're now going to take a clip look that's Lucinda Statler, the City of Columbia Planning Administrator, is showing that transforming our streets may be a slow process, but it can happen, and what that actually means for the community itself.
And this is a picture I just love to show. This is the Gervais Street from a National Geographic article from 1984. Gervais Street was named one of the worst streetscapes in America. And now it's been almost 40 years, so that's before most of y'all were born. But I think what it talks about is just what it shows us is it takes a long time, you know, just to see some of these come to light. I think the Vista plan and the Green Street Bridge is something I get excited about because I saw the plan happen and now it's part of the infrastructure is being implemented. But we don't plan for today, we don't plan for tomorrow, we plan for the future. So it's just something we have to keep in mind when it comes to a vision for walking and biking. We really have to think long term. Something may not seem like it makes sense today or tomorrow, but if we're thinking about how our city's gonna look in 20 or 30 years, you know, it really doesn't matter.
So as a transplant from Michigan, I've only seen Gervais Street look a certain way. And so that clip is very interesting to see what it was. I can't remember how long ago to what it currently is. But I like what she talked about, really getting to the crux of sustainability, not just, you know, the resources that we have today, but how are we planning for the future? And so this idea, which was mentioned earlier, about thinking long term. And so what are your ideas about that as we're looking at, you know, we've talked about resiliency. We know we have, you know, the different events that can take place, preparing for that. Just what are your thoughts about the long-term planning in general and all that comes with it? We know planning isn't free. We know changes in infrastructure isn't going to happen without some type of funds or resources. And so just that long-term planning for what could happen or hopefully for prevention, just what are your thoughts? I see. Oh, go ahead, Clint.
I'll start, Dr. Warren. You know, it is the long game and the vision. You paint the vision, and our city planning staff have done a good job with the Columbia Compass and working with walk bike planning. But the connectivity, you need all the pieces to work. Even though you've got that long-term plan, if any of those links breaks down, then it really doesn't work. And I think one of the things that we struggle with in Columbia is we've got these wonderful neighborhoods, but the connectivity of them in these great areas of our city, but the connectivity, whether it's public transit or whether it's biking and walking trails, is something that we really need to improve upon. So I think how we communicate that plan and that vision is so critically important, so that we don't have a community that may say, yeah, that sounds great, but when it comes time to do it in their little area, in their backyard, no, we don't want you to drop that travel lane and put in a bike lane. We like having our 4 lanes instead of 2 lanes and bike lanes, even though the traffic studies might show, yeah, this makes a lot of sense to do. This is a great opportunity. How we do that outreach and communicate is vitally important, because again, if any of those links is broken, then the connectivity piece is not really there. It becomes dangerous for folks that are trying to commute to maybe downtown to work on a bike. And so I think something that we've really got to focus on doing well is communicating that vision and communicating that overall vision and how each particular, you know, spoke in the wheel is important. And let's not just not do this because maybe I don't really like that. Let's think about the total collective. And to get people thinking that way and show them the vision, I think they become a lot more supportive of what you're trying to do overall. So that's a long game. It's very difficult to do, but critically important that we do that so we don't end up with these gaps throughout.
Stacey or Matt, any thoughts? Okay.
I'll just chime in and say, yeah, I agree that is a long game. And the resources need to be there to implement. You know, we do planning, we do a lot of talking and planning and meeting. And the implementation part is the hard part because a lot of time the funding isn't there to move forward. And you need people to come to the table to move something forward, whether it's through legislation or if it's through a committee or, you know, if it's through the energy office, we need money to make it happen. So it does take time and you have to be patient and wait for the right thing, everything to come together to make it happen. And that patience can sometimes lead people to go, well, what happened? So it is a long game.
I'll mention one other thing, Dr. Warren, building on what Stacey said, you just have to be creative. Sometimes we were looking at bike lanes for Calhoun Street and doing a little bit of a road diet. And that's a project that we had some Richland County penny funding for. And, but as we looked at it, we needed to really do some major work on Calhoun Street and some, reclamation work and repaving rather than grinding and striping. And so we looked at various funding sources and we were able to apply for some of the state gas tax money through our county transportation committee and fill that delta so that we could do something really good that we'll be proud of on Calhoun Street. It's a road diet, it's bike lanes, it's new pavement, it's new markings, and we're going to be real proud of it. And we were on the cusp of maybe not being able to do that because the grinding and restriping, the road just wasn't in good enough condition for that to be something that we would be proud of. And so we really had to think out of the box and turn over the couch cushions and rocks to try to find the extra dollars to make it happen. But thankfully they were there, and the county transportation committee came through with the extra dollars for us. So that was an example of a spoke or a link that would have been broken had we not been able to get some other assistance from that funding standpoint.
Okay. And I think this idea of, who are the different spokes on this wheel really gets to the last clip that we're going to take a look at. And so in this one, it was a roundtable discussion at the end of the conference. And so we had, again, the keynote speaker, Dr. Fairchild, is talking about building coalitions to support change. And that really gets to the core of having all of the individuals, the municipalities, the institutions, the communities coming together for the greater good to solve these solutions. And so we'll take a look at this, this final clip that talks about collaborations.
So my thought is that being a guest here and only seeing a little bit of what you are working with, you need power building. That's the way forward. You've got to build power, right? And the power, period, yes. So how do you do that? So there's the coalition building that you're talking about. I mean, that's absolutely key. I would not, and the power for what is the question. You need a campaign. You need to like coalesce everybody around a campaign, and that could be Justice 40. It could be something kind of singular as opposed to just everything, but something singular that you can begin to show. You've got all of these organizations that signed on, and all of these institutions and individuals, and that you can show up as not as a lobbyist and lobbying, but a constituency that really cares about whatever that thing is. The second thing I would say is that I would less go down that government rabbit hole than figure out your corporate strategy. All right, they're going to be here pretty much long term. They all have ESGs and SDIs and all these things that they're now beholden to and wanting to commit. They all have grant money They all have purchasing power, spending power. I really have a corporate strategy. I'd have a corporate procurement strategy around sustainability. Most of them already have climate commitments, I would imagine. I do some research. I get your students to really figure what's, look under that hood and see what's happening there. And then maybe your campaign is to work corporates, get them on your side, and they become a part of your power team to hit up your state legislature. They'll listen to corporations. So I don't know, just a couple of threads that are going through about you can't do one-offs, and you have to find something that's going to be sustained over time, and as you pick up your nuts, you start getting some more. So start maybe small, but then keep building until you really become a powerhouse.
So in this, excuse me, in this particular clip, Dr. Fairchild talks really about the idea of coalition building and really having this coalition kind of come together on maybe one single or major issue. And so we know with this particular conference, we were talking about climate change and the things that can be done or need to be done. But what are your thoughts about this idea? Because we've talked about it for, the better part of an hour about we can't really solve any of these issues as silos alone. There's going to have to be, efforts on multiple parts. And so just what is your thought about this idea of the coalition building and what potentially could be that single issue or maybe a few issues that they could coalesce around?
I could probably go first on this. Dr. Fairchild is just so smart and she's so strategic and she's done this for so long. And I've thought a lot about that wrap-up session a lot over the last few months and thinking about, well, what is the next step and where to go from here? And I have some ideas about that. You don't want me to do that now, do you?
You want to share at least one or just a little snippet?
Okay, well, the little snippet is, so like what's something that's going to, and I like this idea that, you need to be building coalitions, kind of getting people around kind of a central idea. And it seems to me like a central idea that's powerfully unifying has to do with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So this is a ginormous piece of legislation, a historic piece of legislation, $1.2 trillion of investments in our nation's infrastructure. Everybody likes this. I mean, this is something that's powerfully unifying, right? That can turn allies out of all kinds of different people, because if all of this money is going to be spent in updating the infrastructure, think about all of the stakeholders who stand to benefit from that, who become winners in that, who then can become allies with one another around trying to really optimize the benefits that come out of this piece of legislation. And in our particular political climate here in South Carolina and Columbia, that to me sounds like a winning issue to mobilize and organize people around, something that's really going to bring together business community, government agencies, the public. Like this is definitely like a really unifying thing where we can really build coalitions.
I'm sorry, Stacey or Clint, any thoughts?
I don't have any thoughts on a particular item. I don't know if I can necessarily speak to that because of my role, but I do agree with her comments that everybody does need to come together, and when you do, that speaks volumes. So I am helpful for the infrastructure funding. I know that the city's going to get some specific funding for energy efficiency conservation block grant. So I'm hoping that you all will be able to use that. I know a big benefit, hopefully, that can come from this is helping residents with weatherizing their homes or making that infrastructure or their structures more efficient too. I guess I just said an issue, but that is something that has rung as a spot that needs some more funding.
Yeah, Stacey, you make a great point. And when you think about I can't remember the percentage of dwellings within Columbia that are rentals, but it's really, really high. And so how do you incentivize the landlords to make those investments? That's something that we need to work on collectively. I think engaging we talk about the city government can do this, the county government, and we need to work together to do that. The university needs to do this, but I know we haven't talked as much about the business community and engaging them. And she speaks to that a little bit. I know y'all have heard the mayor and some of our city council members say we're open for business. There's a big drive for economic development and to be business friendly, and that's great. That's also an opportunity to be interfacing and dialoguing with the businesses about how we used to do a conference. Green is good for business, right? And so how to be green. And I was able to attend the ribbon cutting ceremony for Mark Anthony Brewing, which is not in the city, but it's right outside the city, and it's our biggest water and sewer customer that we have. And that's where they make White Claw, and they're all about making a lot of White Claw beverages and canning those and turning a profit. But at that ribbon cutting ceremony, the president of the company talked about sustainability and being friendly to the environment and treating their employees well. And they have installed, and it was quite expensive. I wish I had memorized the figures, but they installed a system to capture every bit of carbon that will be released from that facility, treat it, and use it to recarbonate or to carbonate their beverages that they're making. So he called it the SpaceX of a brewery. I mean, the technology that's being used in that brewery and that facility is amazing, and then what they're doing to recapture the carbon was pretty cool. And it's something they didn't have to do, but they made that investment to do that. So and I don't know how that business case looks long term, but I think they recognize that's the right thing to do. And so it seems to be working well for them. Engaging the business community and learning from what others are doing is important. And that's probably, if you're going to build a team, at least in Columbia right now, you got to include the business community in that and get their backing in order for it to be successful.
And that actually goes right into some of the questions that we've actually received from the viewing audience. And so thank you for those of you who are watching us live and have posted some of your questions. And so to the latter part of what Clint just talked about, and I'll kind of paraphrase here. The question is, how do we circumvent or oppose the greenwashing that could be used for those industries, or maybe those in the business sector that could potentially be polluting, but are trying to capitalize off of, using catchphrases or different things to kind of maybe lessen the impact of what they're doing. And so obviously, as we talk about having collaborations, having coalitions working together, being talked about, different things that could be done, infrastructures that we can put into play, but how do we kind of ensure that our players are truly working on on behalf of the city and the citizens in the right way? So it's not just, okay, we know we have a focus on climate or climate resiliency. Are actions truly aligning with that? So I said a lot, but it's just essentially, how are we going to hold ourselves accountable? All the players in this, how will we hold them accountable? Or how can we hold them accountable?
Sorry, I was muted. I think about just in terms of economic development and our recruitment of industry or commercial development, as we're looking at as the Midlands region, and what types of businesses do we want to recruit, and what's the environmental record of the businesses that we're looking to recruit. Whoever asked the question is right on point about some of the the masking that happens. I think about these, water is very important to me, obviously, on water quality and source water protection. And you think about some of these forever chemicals, the perfluorinated substances that we can only measure. We only have the technology to measure some of those chemicals. There's a whole lot more out there that we can't measure. And it seems like, and I've read articles nationally where there are these polluting industries that, well, once you figure out how to measure one particular compound, well, they'll stop using that one and use another one that accomplishes the same thing. We just can't measure for it yet. And so from a regulatory standpoint, that becomes very difficult for, agencies like DHEC to regulate. But I think from a policy standpoint, as we look at making ourselves available, making our community available for industry to come in, we ought to be thinking about what is their environmental record, what's their record for sustainability, and how do they look when we look at other installations they may have across the nation, and what's their posture there. That's the first thing that comes to mind in terms of how to attack that moving forward.
Yeah, and I would say some of that too is just having the knowledge of what, somebody may say they are doing something, but being educated yourself and knowing what to look for. And then also some local governments have programs where they recognize businesses that are doing green things. So for example, the Midlands has a green business recognition initiative. And then also just the local government could require their businesses to be a certain level of efficient, require that these buildings be built to a certain standard, require these businesses to report their sustainability measures, report the waste that they send out, report the recycling, report their energy, and that be just required for those businesses. So there's different things that can be done. It's just getting that on the books.
Okay. And one final question / comment that was made, and anyone could feel free. I know, Stacey, you talked about it, is in reference to the Green Bank. And the comment was the Green Bank effort needs broader grassroots building, which we have not necessarily done well with NGOs in South Carolina. And so if anyone, Stacey or whomever, would like to kind of maybe speak to that, the how good a Green Bank could be if it's going to be efficient or effective.
Sure. So I'll speak to just where we are with that concept right now. So right now we're just looking at the feasibility of a green bank, and we have talked to a lot of stakeholders, from communities to government to state agencies to businesses to you name it. We've tried to talk to all the different people, different sectors in the state to find out where the gaps are and what kind of programs are needed. So that's where we are now. And then after that, that report should come out this summer as well, maybe August, I think. And after that, then we'll look and see, okay, so how should that take form in South Carolina? And then where will the funding come from? So we are, at the beginning of it. So I don't know who put the question out there. Feel free to reach out. And, we'd love to talk to you because we're still at that point where we're talking to stakeholders. So we'd like to hear all the different ideas out there. I don't know if we'll have enough funding for everything, but we'd like to get started somewhere and make sure that we're meeting those needs.
Great. Well, as we begin to wrap up, and we're not done just yet, we are coming up on 7:30, but there's some additional information that we want to share. But Clint, Stacey, and Matt, thank you so much for giving your perspective on the different sessions that took place during the conference. And so at this time, Matt, I think you want to share a little bit about what has been on the back end of the conference. And so obviously we had the 2 days where we had a lot of information sharing, a lot of that coalition building, but something great actually has come about as well a couple months later. So if you would like to share, please feel free.
Yeah, so in that last session that you showed that clip from, let me get my screen share up here. In that last session, we were asking the question, where do we go from here, right? Like, what are the next steps? What's the logical way forward? And that clip was really great to kind of set the stage for this. Like, you need to build around like kind of a central issue that really unifies support. So I built a grant proposal around that idea for the Ann Johnson Institute, which had funded the original Climate Ready Columbia. And fortunately, they have granted me a multi-year commitment to renew and extend the grant. And I want to talk about a little bit about kind of where it's going. And it's building on what we decided in that kind of wrap-up session. So, the idea is we want to take advantage of these unifying opportunities. And kind of one of the big conclusions of the conference is that one of the biggest opportunities is this Infrastructure Investment and Job Act. So at the conference, you talk about all these great ideas, all these things you want to do, weatherize buildings and new construction techniques, but of course, all of that costs money. And it's usually really hard to get that. This is why it is so exciting that the IIJA has been passed, because it is such an historic investment in our infrastructure. And included in that bill is all sorts of resources that will help us respond to the climate crisis. Clean energy, EV transportation, infrastructure improvements for severe weather and climate change, energy efficient buildings and retrofits, and so forth. All of this it could be funded through the IIJA. And furthermore, it provides opportunities to make progress on one of the big themes of the conference, which was environmental justice and equity. So the IIJA is being enforced in light of this important executive order, the Justice 40 executive order, which says that at least 40% of the benefits of federal investments in climate and clean energy must go to disadvantaged communities. So this is another opportunity to make progress. So the IIJA resources available to local communities include competitive grants. And these grants are not just kind of mandated formula funding being given to state Department of Transportation kind of stuff. There are granting opportunities for cities, for counties, for nonprofits, for tribes. There's research grants for universities and colleges. And then there's also, on the implementation side, there's opportunities here for local businesses to enter into contracts in implementation of the bill, of the law. So the next stage goal of Climate Ready Columbia is to secure IIJA resources to support our local response to the climate crisis, to advance environmental justice, and to strengthen the resilience of local communities. And the way that we're going to be doing that is by partnering with the Energy Foundation in facilitating a network of potential beneficiaries of IIJA opportunities. This is government agencies, higher education, businesses, advocacy organizations. And so this has already started with that electric vehicles information session. I know many people on this call were there for that. So this is part of that activity. And Climate Ready Columbia will be focusing on facilitating a subset of that network. And the subset we're going to be focusing on is potential IIJA beneficiaries who operate at the municipal level. So city and county governments, universities, small businesses. And we'll begin with the Midlands region, but we want to make those resources available to other municipalities. So what we'll be doing with the network is providing information about IIJA opportunities. So, hey, there's a grant that you could potentially apply for, City of Forest Acres, or there's opportunities for local contracting work. And then we can provide matchmaking opportunities for network affiliates to collaborate. And we could provide technical assistance for securing IIJA resources. So for instance, if somebody wants to apply for one of these grants, but they don't know how to get started, or they need to be hooked up with somebody who has the capacity to write these sorts of grants, then we can step in and try to provide that technical assistance. So more information on all of that is coming soon, but if you would like to get more information, join the network, and you can do it by clicking on this link, and I think they've put it in the YouTube page description. This link, just click it, just a couple quick questions. Let us know what your interests are. You can be included in the network, and then we'll continue to give you information about how those IIJA benefits can be benefiting us here to help us accomplish our goals.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing, Matt. And it's great that, after the year or so of planning that took place for the conference, that this opportunity has come about. And so we can hopefully see some great things come out of that. And so that wasn't the only great thing that has happened. There's also something taking place with the City of Columbia. So we can get that slide up as well. I'll share a little bit of information. So our viewing audience can also have another site that they can go to get more information. I'm not sure if I'm going to see it on my end, so if someone could just let me know. Oh, now I do. So we have the Urban Heat Island mapping. So the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which we know as NOAA, has selected the City of Columbia and Richland County to participate in a national and international urban island mapping initiative. And the reason is to better understand and guide action to reduce heat health risks, encourage economic development, and improve overall quality of life in the region. This funding will support necessary equipment, organizational efforts, and data processing of the mapping project. It is going to cover over 160 square miles of Columbia and Richland County together. And it's also going to fund the installation of stationary temperature and humidity sensors to monitor the urban heat island effect through the summer. So this project will produce a publicly available report. So this is going to be great. We can get some feedback after all of this data has been collected. And there's also going to be digital mapping data showing variations in temperature and humidity for the region that can be used to improve quality of life in many ways. And so one of the great things about this initiative is that it really has us looking at citizen scientists, because there's an opportunity for you as just an ordinary citizen to become involved. So the heat mapping is going to take place on Saturday, August 6th, and so it does require volunteers, and so you will be needed to participate throughout the day. So for more information, if you go to the link that's posted, you can get more information about actually what's going to take place, and if you want to sign up to be a volunteer for that day, you will have the opportunity to do so. And so we definitely encourage you to sign up to be a volunteer. If there's others that you know would be interested, to share this information as well. So we definitely encourage that. So thank you, Justin, if you can bring that down. So it's very encouraging that, again, after a year of planning for the conference, we have seen all of these different initiatives to take place. And so we definitely encourage all of you who are watching or will view this later that if you are interested in becoming involved, there's a lot for you to do. We've talked about the coalition building or the emphasis that has been put on municipalities and institutions, as well as our business partners, but there's definitely a role for the regular citizen. So as Clint has talked about those different spokes in the wheels, it does include the everyday citizen as well. So again, Matt, Clint, Stacy, thank you so much for giving your perspectives on the conference. We thank you for the work that you're currently doing in your respective areas. Before we wrap up, I just open the floor if there's any additional comments or ideas that you would like to share.
Can I just thank everyone?
You sure can.
Thank you so much for moderating, and thank you, CPAC, for putting this on and for all of the hard work that you all do. And Clint and Stacy, you guys are awesome. Just thanks.
I agree. Congratulations to everybody. Congratulations to you, Matt, on the grant. I think that's fantastic news, and pleasure being with y'all tonight. Thanks for putting this on.
Yeah, I'd also like to express my thanks for the opportunity and everyone here. I think it's a great session, and I'm ready to keep it going.
All right. Well, thank you all. And again, for all of you who are watching live or either viewing, this is the quarterly webinar for CPAC. And so we look forward to the next one where we're sharing more information with you about ways in which we're addressing climate change and the great activities that are taking place. And so have a great evening, and we'll see you on the next webinar. Good night.